Welcome back and thank you for staying with eNCA. Of course, ANC delegates have voted for their preferred top 7 and the new National Executive Committee. Looking at the new leadership and the NEC, what does it tell us about the party's renewal project and uniting the party? Well, political analyst Ebrahim Harvey joins me now for his analysis live in studio. Dr. Harvey, you know, yesterday I actually wanted to get your number and send you an SMS. You were almost spot on. You actually predicted on Friday that Zweli Mkhize would come out with about 1,500 and that his contender, Cyril Ramaphosa, would come out with more. He came out with about 1,800.
Yes. No, well, he got a bit more than I had thought. But it was still a comfortable victory for Ramaphosa, you know. I knew deep down that I think he would pull it off, you know. But that is now surpassed. We finished with that. There are big problems, really. I think that, you see, it's the first time, the second time, in fact. That's why it's so bad. I'm sure the KZN people feel dreadful that nobody from KZN got into the top 6 and now the top 7.
Yeah.
It happened in 2017. It's happened now. Whether they are to be blamed or whether there's something going on, you know, the machinations to keep the KZN out of the top 7.
Yes, because they boast the largest voting contingency. This is embarrassing.
Yeah, but it's sad, you know, it's really, and I think it's not going to augur well. It depends how they interpret this for the NEC's functioning and also cabinet and, you know, how this thing will express itself. I'll tell you something. The question also of Mkhize becomes important. What is his future? What is his future after this defeat? You know, he performed very well, I think, as Minister of Health, and then this thing happened with Digital Vibes. I think it will be very unfortunate if he's sacrificed, if they don't find a place for him and, you know, it just ends for him there. It would be very much of a problem. But don't think that this thing, I said to Kate Talk this morning, I was interviewed, this could be a Pyrrhic victory for Ramaphosa, because really, as much as there's a lot of euphoria and happiness now that he beat Zweli Mkhize, you must remember, he still is sitting with this Concord thing. Whether the Concord thing will proceed in the light of both the rejection of that report in Parliament and now the defeat of Mkhize and the victory of Ramaphosa is another matter. But there's going to be lots of, I think, consequences, you know, particularly in Parliament. You must remember how strongly the EFF in particular, they were so vociferous, they wanted him to be impeached and the process to follow, and you can see it was defeated. I suspect very strongly that when Parliament resumes next year, the EFF in particular, and to a lesser extent maybe the DA, is really going to give Ramaphosa a very tough time, notwithstanding this victory. So I'm just saying, on the whole, Ramaphosa must not interpret this victory of his as, you know, a clean slate for him to proceed as he wishes to next year. I think in Parliament in particular, and to some extent in the NEC, depending who what the NEC consists of, who goes into the NEC today. But I think a very bumpy road lies ahead, especially in the run-up to the 2024 elections. And I still insist, despite the victory of Ramaphosa, depending on how the Phala scandal is going to be resolved, on the whole, you must remember, and I think we don't pay enough attention, this conference of the ANC has taken place in the midst of the worst socio-economic unemployment crisis,
the organizational report was very scathing.
Which is precisely why, and I heard Gondwana this morning on radio, but why they did not implement the South African Reserve Bank, even the question of the extending the mandate, which, you know, is not necessarily calling for the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, but extending the mandate of the Reserve Bank to include a key objective of employment. And this is what is argued against, and, you know, not the right time, etc. So I'm just saying that we're sitting at a very critical juncture at this moment, and we must not allow even Ramaphosa's victory, you know, to obscure this huge crisis. And I don't know whether in fact the ANC is going to be able to address, because on the policy front, what has emerged, is not going to equip the ruling party, with the kind of policies to deal with this deepening crisis.
Yeah. Dr. Harvey, sorry, I had to cut you there just a little bit. We're not necessarily taking the viewer live yet to Nasrec, but as you can see there at home, on the right side of your screen is plenary. We've got a full picture for you. We've got a choir already singing, so there is something definitely happening in plenary. There is a program that is starting there. We do have our senior reporter, Slindolo Masigani, along with Siphamandla Koke. We've got Puleli Chwiti Jones as well inside plenary. We understand that, of course, today, being the last day of the National Elective Conference of the ANC, the 55th one that is, that the program still is expected to continue. You might remember that overnight they were voting for the top 80 in terms of the National Executive Committee. They were voting for the 80 members of the ANC's NEC, and I think I see Panyaza Lissufi there, the former education MEC in Gauteng, and obviously the chairperson of the ANC in this particular province. And a lot of people would say that he did a good job with negotiating and the horse trading after we saw that Gauteng came out tops, basically in the top 7 structure of the ANC. And he's there dancing with Banabahaye, as he would usually call them during the time that he was the MEC of education in Gauteng. He used to call them my children. So there he is dancing, seemingly very happy with the outcome, and in a few moments' time we expect that the program will continue. We know that the president still needs to close the conference. The Secretary General also still needs to give an overview, or rather talk about the reforms that have come to after all the commissions that they were sitting in throughout the course of these 5 days. So let's take you to a short ad break now. I understand that my colleague Radan Moyani is actually inside plenary as well, so he'll be able to, at some point in the last hour that he and I are on air with you, tell us exactly what feeling he got as he sat there in plenary. Let's take you to a break. We're back at 3 o'clock. A break yet. But obviously we still have those live visuals coming to you from plenary at the Nasrec Expo Centre, where the ANC is holding its 55th National Elective Conference, today being its 5th and last day. They were delayed for quite a bit, Dr. Ebrahim Harvey, and at some point we thought that this conference would probably go on for another day, but it looks like they're really pushing, and they had to make short the commissions, discussions of policy, which is very important, because that now brings me and you in as the citizens that are expecting that this new leadership will take the country forward. Was it a good idea? They say that, we had policy conference in July, so there was no need for us to sit for too long in commissions. But if they didn't really have the chance to debate and talk about all the things that they need to talk about in terms of policy, what does it mean for you and I?
No, it's very unfortunate. Number of reasons, myself. You take for example, I really am disappointed that I thought the basic income grant, given the depth of this crisis, and what is 375, obviously worse off if you don't have it. But the ANC lost a key and critical moment, especially in the midst of the worst socio-economic crisis, probably ever in the history of this country right now. To have missed the opportunity of debating and adopting a basic income grant, even that if it was at least 1,000 rand to 1,500 that many people are calling for. Heinrich Ray even wrote a book dedicated to justifying the basic income grant, and looked at around 1.5, etc. And also there are other issues. I mentioned the Reserve Bank. We're not necessarily talking about the outright nationalization of the Reserve Bank. I don't understand it that way. If the ANC had called for an extension of the mandate of the Reserve Bank to include as a key objective dealing with employment and employment creation, I think it would have made a big difference, to tackling unemployment. And I listened to Godamano on radio this morning, very unconvincing, so both the basic income grant and the extension of the mandate of the Reserve Bank lost opportunities, really. And I think when they could least of all afford. Masego, this is the worst crisis. I mean, malnutrition, hunger, poverty, the rural areas are much worse, but it's happening in the urban areas too. I mean, many people are going to bed hungry, malnutrition, you know, a whole lot of very adverse consequences of the socio-economic crisis is there. It's there, the ANC knows about it. So why they did not push hard enough for the adoption of a basic income grant at least is just really very disappointing, really.
And for me, what was also, you know, at stake, I think, for some of the people in support of Cyril Ramaphosa as president of the ANC was, of course, the fact that we're going through a power crisis, an electricity crisis in our country. And a few months ago, he presented a plan that he had in terms of removing red tape, etc. And I just wondered, in terms of the change of leadership, would that plan also change then, especially the talk of privatization, etc.? You know, I don't know your thoughts around that in terms of him pushing, apparently, for the privatization of Eskom.
Well, you know, the privatization of Eskom is implicit. Many people have not analyzed this. The unbundling of Eskom into three different spheres is the beginning. It's the beginning of the process of privatization, you see. And not enough attention, I think, has been paid to this, even by COSATU, you know. But it's very unfortunate that, again, and you're so correct, that a clear policy direction on this Eskom crisis. I mean, we're sitting right now, this conference takes place with the worst load shedding, you know, in post-apartheid South Africa. So you would have thought that that situation is disastrous, the effects, so it would have informed some policy decision around Eskom and getting to grips with the reasons for load shedding, etc. And it seems like this conference is going to end without any clear and definite resolve on tackling the electricity crisis, the key ingredient of which is this increasing load shedding and the devastating effect, Masego, it's having on people's lives, business, everything. You know.
Looking at you know, some of the SOEs, you know, he mentioned it in his political review as president on Friday, that, you know, there are various policies that they agreed to that would make sure that these SOEs have the money to be able to run. But we all know what happened at those particular SOEs. And you mentioned, for instance, that, you know, there are some things that he can be praised for throughout the course of this week. Some of them, by many analysts, being the proclamations that he signed in terms of what the SIU can do, giving power to the SIU to be able to investigate state capture and hopefully go after your Lomas, for instance, the NPA being able to get Lomas to come back from the UK, extradite Lomas to come back from the UK and face trial for his alleged involvement in where we find ourselves with Eskom today. You know, so I'm assuming, you know, most of those people would say that his, you know, agenda, his political agenda has been bolstered by, you know, the amount of support that he received this time around. And, you know, maybe some of the things that he's done will then be accelerated.
Yes. No, I think we must draw a distinction between the electricity Eskom crisis. It is an SOE, and the more general crisis is, no doubt, Ramaphosa has made some major significant strides. You know, Brian Molefe and these people who, I mean, who had ever thought they could end up in court? Yeah. And it carries his signature, you know. He's made huge strides, and that is partly why many people had hoped he emerges victorious, because that agenda might have been, you know, dismantled if he did not, you know, be elected again as president. But I think it's the electricity crisis. I think on the SOE broad front, he's made a lot of gains and, you know, got the necessary architecture in place, the SIU, the public protector, etc., going for these cases. And you can see it's a building up of momentum. But I think most importantly, and this is what I think he has not done enough, and certainly this conference is going to end on the policy front without resolutions to, we're going to continue with this electricity crisis. That is the thing. And I don't think Ramaphosa or this meeting is ending on a note that people could feel, you know, confident about bringing an end to this devastating load shedding crisis. And it's one of the big failures, I think, especially since this conference takes place in the midst of the worst load shedding crisis we've had in post-apartheid South Africa. But no doubt, you know, you have to take your hat off for Ramaphosa on the anti-corruption crusade. You know, for the past 18 months, you know, it took him quite a long while to get dug into that. But once he did, you know, no doubt, all that has happened, you know, the Brian Molefis and others being brought to court, the SIU reports, to my mind, carries his signature.
Yeah.
And it is primarily why many people felt that the other crowd, the RET, wanted to dislodge him from power so that they could resume, you know, the kind of looting and corruption that has been going on for years in this country, you know, and that no doubt Ramaphosa has put a stop to in many ways, you know, and beginning to leave a legacy, I think, in that regard, you know, which we need to recognize.
Now, the NEC is going to be announced at some point in that plenary as soon as the program actually gets underway. I remember the outgoing spokesperson of the ANC, Pule Mabe, yesterday when the journalist posed a question on what time they expect to start the official program, you know, and what time the president might close the conference. And he said to the incoming Secretary General, don't answer this question, otherwise tomorrow we'll spend a lot of time in the press conference answering why we didn't start on time. And we all know that it's because of how the conference started that we find ourselves where we talk a lot about time. But, you know, going back to the leadership that has been elected now, you and I were talking about the future of the chairperson of the ANC in the Limpopo province, Stan Mathabatha, and you were talking about how the constituency of you know, the branches sometimes is not carried all the way to conference, but it looks like this time you know, the Limpopo branches made sure that they were heard.
Yeah, no, you know, I raised this question yesterday, and really I think you know, the ANC would certainly, to my mind, be making some progress if they give recognition, and even if they have to revisit the Constitution. You know, it's a very serious problem. It flies in the face of our constitutional democracy and the mandate of the branch. This is a branch-based conference. I'm speaking about, and there's many cases like this. It's not only the Stan Mathabatha and the Gwedi Mantashe thing, what had happened, you know, with, I mean, Gwedi was being led by him by, I think, close to 500 nominations, you know,
branch.
And still Gwedi ended up, you know, winning the thing. So the big question, and I hear the wheeling and dealing and all this, the question is this, you know, and actually the key players around the wheeling and dealing and the horse trading they call, and the jockeying and the, it's not the branch members. This is the thing. It's the leading figures, the RET people, the regional, provincial executive committee, and those structures, I think, that tilts the balance in, especially if there's a big shift from what the mandate of the branches to a different position or a different candidate. I don't think it's acceptable. You know, this is the problem, and I don't think you know, the ANC pays enough attention. Maybe they've benefited from it, you know, a particular faction, but we need to look at this question of what is the worth of the mandate of the branches if along the line, you know, all this wheeling and dealing subverts that. That's the authentic voice to me. Those initial nominations from the branches, you know, and in the case of Mantashe, for example, I mean, you know, Stan was leading by over 500 nominations. That was the authentic voice.
Yeah.
What happens later on when things are wheeling and dealing, it sacrifices and sabotages that voice, you know. This is the problem for me.